Imagine waking up tomorrow morning and seeing a headline that says American boots are on the ground inside Iran. Not aircraft, not missiles, not drones, actual soldiers on Iranian soil. Right now, in this moment, that possibility is closer to reality than most Americans realize, and the chain of events that could lead there has already started moving. Yesterday, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu stood in front of cameras in Jerusalem and said something that stopped every military analyst in the world cold. He said, and I am quoting directly here, that a revolution in Iran cannot come only from the air. And then he added, there has to be a ground component as well. He then smiled and said he would take the liberty of not sharing all the possibilities. Let that sit with you for a second. The leader of Israel, the country that launched this entire war alongside the United States, just publicly told the world that bombing Iran from the sky is not enough. Something must happen on the ground. And on the exact same day those words were spoken, over 2,000 United States Marines were already sailing toward the Middle East aboard the USS Tripoli and the USS New Orleans, having departed from Okinawa, Japan on March 11th. These are not support troops. These are not logistics personnel. The 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit is one of the most capable rapid assault forces on the face of the Earth, trained specifically for amphibious landings, island seizures, and rapid ground operations in hostile territory, and they are moving, right now, toward Iran. Welcome to Unlocked History Hub. If you have been following this war since it started on February 28th, you already know that the air campaign has been extraordinary in its scale and intensity. Over 15,000 Iranian targets struck in 21 days. Iran's Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei killed on the opening night. Nuclear enrichment facilities destroyed. Ballistic missile production facilities reduced to rubble. By almost every conventional military metric, the United States and Israel have dominated the skies over Iran completely. But here is the question that Netanyahu just raised in public, and the question that changes the entire calculus of this war moving forward. What happens if air power alone is not enough to finish what was started? Hit that subscribe button right now and give this video a like, because what we are about to walk through is the most consequential strategic question of this entire conflict. An Unlocked History Hub is going to break it down completely. Let me start with the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit, because understanding exactly what this force is built to do is the key to understanding why its deployment is such a significant signal. The 31st MEU is not a standard military unit. It is a self-contained, self-sustaining combat force that requires no outside support to execute its operations. It travels with its own aircraft, its own landing craft, its own artillery, its own reconnaissance assets, and its own logistics chain. Aboard the USS Tripoli, it carries F-35B Lightning II fighter jets, MV-22 Osprey tilt-rotor aircraft for rapid troop insertion, AH-1Z Viper attack helicopters, and CH-53 heavy-lift helicopters. The entire unit is structured around one core capability that very few military formations in the world possess: the ability to move from sea to land rapidly, seize and hold terrain under fire, and operate independently for extended periods. Marine veteran and counterintelligence specialist Jonathan Hackett told the Jerusalem Post this week that only the MEU can conduct this type of operation at the size, scope, and scale required for what is being discussed. He emphasized that this capability is unique in the entire American military. Now, the Pentagon has been careful with its language. Officials have said that the deployment of the 31st MEU does not necessarily indicate that a ground operation is imminent, and Trump himself stood in front of cameras and said he is not putting troops anywhere. But here is what I find deeply telling, and this is my perspective based on watching how these situations develop over time. Trump also said nobody is shooting at American forces on the same day an F-35 made an emergency landing after being struck by Iranian fire. The gap between what is said publicly and what is actually happening in this conflict has been consistent and significant from day one. When the United States deploys 2,000 Marines on amphibious assault ships with F-35Bs on deck and sends them toward a conflict zone, that is not precautionary housekeeping. That is placing a loaded weapon within striking distance and waiting for the order to use it. Let me walk you through the specific targets that military analysts and even sitting U.S. senators are publicly discussing for a potential ground operation, because the conversation happening in Washington right now is far more advanced than the public statements suggest. The first and most discussed target is Kharg Island, Senator Lindsey Graham posted on social media this week, "He who controls Karg Island controls the destiny of this war," with the Marine phrase "Semper Fi" underneath. That was not subtle. Karg Island is the terminal responsible for approximately 90% of Iran's entire oil export capacity. Every barrel of oil that Iran sells to fund its government, its military, its proxy network, flows out through Karg Island. If that island is seized and held by American Marines, Iran's economic lifeline is physically cut off, not disrupted from the air, not interdicted at sea, physically occupied by American forces. Former Congressman Pete Sessions went even further this week, stating publicly that a Marine seizure of Karg Island would not constitute boots on the ground in a combat sense. He framed it as securing a facility rather than a ground invasion. That distinction is going to matter a great deal in how this is sold to the American public if it happens. The second discussed target involves Iran's stockpiles of highly enriched uranium. Netanyahu said at his press conference that after 20 days of strikes, Iran can no longer enrich uranium or manufacture ballistic missiles. But Netanyahu also acknowledged that existing stockpiles of enriched material are a separate problem. Enriched uranium that already exists cannot be destroyed from the air in the same way that enrichment centrifuges can be bombed. Securing those stockpiles or verifying their destruction requires physical presence on the ground. That is a mission the 31st MEU's reconnaissance and raid capabilities are specifically designed to execute. Now, I want to give you my honest assessment of what this all means for American interests, because this is the part of the story that I think deserves the most serious attention. The air campaign against Iran has been, by the military metrics being reported, extraordinarily successful. Iran's nuclear enrichment capability appears to have been destroyed. Iran's ballistic missile production has been severely degraded. The Iranian leadership structure has been decimated, with Khamenei dead and his replacement, Mojtaba Khamenei, not seen publicly since taking power amid reports that he was wounded in an initial strike. By the standards of an air campaign designed to achieve specific military objectives, Operation Epic Fury has delivered results that would have seemed impossible to predict just 3 months ago. But here is what concerns me deeply about the logic now emerging from Netanyahu's statements and from the Washington conversation around the MEU deployment. There is a significant difference between destroying an adversary's military capability from the air and actually ending a conflict in a stable, sustainable way. History has a very clear record on this point. Devastating air campaigns have ended wars in some cases and created deeper, longer, more costly quagmires in others. The determining factor is almost always what happens next, on the ground, among the population, within the political structure of the country that was bombed. Iran is a nation of 85 million people. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps has a ground force that has spent decades preparing specifically for the scenario of a foreign military attempting to operate inside Iranian territory. Iranian military commanders said this week that they are producing missiles even during wartime conditions and have no concern about stockpile levels. The IRGC commander looked directly into a camera and said his forces have been waiting for this day for years. A ground operation in Iran, even a limited one targeting Karg Island, would occur within range of Iranian coastal defenses. Iranian ballistic missiles, Iranian drones, and the full network of IRGC ground forces that have been mobilizing since the first strike on February 28th. Senator Sessions drew a distinction between seizing an island and going into Iranian cities. That distinction makes sense on a tactical map. It is much more complicated in the actual operational reality of a contested amphibious landing under fire from a military that has been preparing for exactly that scenario for 20 years. The global dimensions of this decision are enormous, and I do not think they are being given enough weight in the public conversation. The 31st MEU is normally the primary rapid response force for the entire Indo-Pacific region. Its deployment to the Middle East has pulled one of the most critical ground combat elements away from the Pacific theater, at a moment when China is watching every development in this conflict with intense focus. Military historians and Pacific commanders have noted that this deployment signals potential weakness in exactly the region where signals of weakness carry the highest risk. North Korea is also watching. South Korea's border with the north is defended in significant part by American forces that are now stretched thinner than they were a month ago. The decision to send the 31st MEU to the Middle East is not just a decision about Iran, it is a decision about the entire global disposition of American military power. And then there is the humanitarian and economic dimension that is already devastating populations that had nothing to do with starting this war. Pakistan imports over 85% of its crude oil. Bangladesh faces fuel shortages affecting hospitals and food production. Sri Lanka is rationing electricity. The Philippines' peso has hit record lows because the country is spending emergency currency reserves on imported fuel at crisis prices. These are the invisible casualties of this conflict, the billions of people in developing nations who are watching their economies absorb a shock they cannot control and cannot escape. A ground operation in Iran, with the escalation that would almost certainly follow from Iranian retaliation, would send energy prices higher still. The economic damage that is already spreading across the developing world would deepen further. And the question of who bears that cost is one that very few people in Washington or Jerusalem appear to be seriously asking. Here is where I think this is genuinely heading, and I want to be clear, this is my analysis based on everything we are watching unfold in real time. The air campaign has achieved its stated military objectives to a significant degree. Iran's nuclear capability appears destroyed, its missile production is severely degraded, its leadership is in chaos. But Netanyahu's statement about a ground component suggests that Israel's actual objective goes beyond disabling Iran's military. The phrase he used was regime change from the bottom up, with Israel and the United States creating conditions for Iranians to overthrow their own government. That is a fundamentally different objective than disabling military capabilities. That is nation reshaping. And nation reshaping from the outside has a historical track record that every American should be deeply familiar with. Iraq taught that lesson at a cost of trillions of dollars and thousands of American lives. Afghanistan wrote that lesson in blood across 20 years. The conditions in Iran are different in important ways, but the fundamental challenge of using external military force to produce internal political transformation is the same. It is one of the hardest things any military force has ever attempted to do. The 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit will arrive in the region by the end of March if it stays on its current course. Netanyahu's words from yesterday are sitting in every command center and every diplomatic back channel. Trump says no ground troops, but Trump has changed his position on this question multiple times across the course of this war. The situation is moving fast, and the decisions being made in the next 30 days will shape this region, this conflict, and the American role in the world for a generation. That is not hyperbole. That is the weight of what is actually in motion right now. Tell me in the comments what you think. Do you believe a ground operation in Iran is coming, or do you think the air campaign is enough to finish this? And if Marines do land on Iranian soil, do you think the mission will be limited to a target like Karg Island? Or does the logic of the situation eventually drag in more? Your perspective genuinely matters in this conversation, and every single comment on Unlocked History Hub gets read. If this breakdown gave you a clearer picture of where this war is heading, please share it with someone in your life who is trying to understand what is actually happening. Most people see the headlines about Marines deploying and Netanyahu talking about ground operations without anyone connecting the full picture for them. You can be the person who does that. Share this video and let people see what is actually moving beneath the surface of this conflict. We will be here covering every development as it unfolds.